Hi everyone, welcome to this workshop, How to Spot a Zombie, Tackling the Leadership Ideas That Just Won't Die. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I know that everyone is busy, so I'm really appreciative that you've decided to spend an hour with us this afternoon. My name is Dara Patel. I'm a development consultant at the King's Fund in the Leadership and Organisational Development team, and I will be facilitating this with my colleague Simon Newitt.
Yeah, afternoon everyone. Like Dara, really thrilled to see so many of you joining us for an afternoon talking about zombies. I'm also a consultant in the Leadership and Organisation Development team here at the King's Fund. A couple of little housekeeping-y bits. We won't be showing slides, so we will be doing a bit of slide work, but you won't be able to get a copy of them afterwards. But we will be recording the session, so you can watch it back on the King's Fund website later. We're going to offer you some ideas and stuff, and we really encourage you to engage with the ideas by using the Q&A function that you can hopefully see on your screens. Share your anecdotes, your questions, your comments, reflections, anything you like. We'll keep an eye on those and loop them into the session as we go, because ordinarily on ShiftWorks, which we'll explain a bit about in a moment, we would be quite interactive. So this is going to be a lot of us talking. If you want to stop that, get some stuff in the Q&A for us.
Next slide, please. So we're here to talk to you about zombies, but we've also mentioned this thing called ShiftWorks. What is that? ShiftWorks is our online learning platform that Simon and I created because we're really interested in tackling some of these zombie ideas and offering a new perspective on leadership and leadership development, sort of all relying on the idea that leadership is about the behavior that you do and it's not a role. And so we're really keen to spread the word about this platform. You can sign up for just £35 a year and get access to free online workshops like this one, and also 9 CPD accredited courses, bite-sized learning, downloadable resources, all in a community of peers, of people who really care about new ideas and kind of bold ideas that are shaping the health and care system. So I think we've got about 3,500 people on the platform now from across 700 organisations in 11 countries. So if you'd like to get involved, please do. And this session today is a bit of a taster of what you'll find on there. Next slide, please.
So let's get into this idea of zombies. And just to be super clear up the top before we get into all this, what we are not going to suggest this afternoon is that people in senior leadership roles are zombies. We are interested in tackling ideas and belief systems about leadership and their impact on our ways of organising in our workplaces. So don't mistake anything we say for anything sort of individual or personal. It's not meant to be that at all. And similarly, I would really encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, dive into the research literature behind it, because we were particularly inspired in our design of ShiftWorks by a bit of research that came out last year called Zombie Leadership, Dead Ideas That Still Walk Among Us. And if you just Google that and Leadership Quarterly, you'll be able to find the full article because it's available for free. And if you want to go deeper in any of this, do go there. Okay, what do we mean by a zombie idea? So first of all, it's an old idea. It's one that's been kicking around for a very long time about leaders and about leadership. And it's an idea that has no supporting evidence for its effectiveness or value, and yet somehow refuses to die out. That doesn't mean there's not a lot of noise and people trying to persuade you that these ideas are valuable. And it's not to say that these ideas have no value whatsoever, but in essence, they don't have any evidence for their effectiveness or usefulness in today's workplace. And you can spot them pretty quickly when you know what to look for. They tend to do three things. They tend to have a really simplistic, reductive take on leadership. They make it sound kind of like, if this, then that, do this, then you'll get that. They usually glamorize leaders and hold them up as these kind of special sort of class of folk with a kind of very rare skill set. And in doing that, they generally uphold hierarchy and privilege in the workplace. And when you can kind of spot those three sort of characteristics, you'll spot these ideas everywhere, in everything from job descriptions to cultural kind of frameworks, and even your own kind of beliefs and attitudes to leadership. So next slide, please. So let's give you a taste of three. There are more, and I encourage you as I go through these to share your anecdotes and connections to any of these ideas that I'm going to walk through. But the first one is the idea that leadership is about leaders. So it's about the job description and the job title rather than what you do or your behavior. You hear this all the time as a kind of one day you'll make a great leader. When we get the right person at the top, everything will fall into place. And if the organization is failing, if we just change the CEO, everything will be fine. If the it's that kind of idea that that everything good or bad that might happen in an organization or in a project or a piece of work is located with the quality of the leader themselves. And it makes leadership all about leaders. And because it belongs to those in senior roles, until you earn the formal job title or get that promotion, you're just aspiring to leadership or you're an emerging leader. Next slide, please. So second idea, great leaders possess specific qualities. So this is a very old idea that leadership has a particular personality and it should look, sound and be a certain way. So you often hear folks say, and I've said this myself actually, thinking about it, that she's a natural leader, or we're looking for someone with the sorts of things you can't teach. I'll know it when I see it kind of thing. And the idea that leadership has this sort of specific personality made up of certain traits is kind of obviously very limiting in and of itself, because it sort of excludes lots of other quieter kind of expressions of leadership and qualities. But it's also really problematic when you consider in the history of leadership in society, we've been conditioned to see these traits as belonging to a very narrow band of people in our society, generally middle-aged, generally middle class, generally white and generally male. So when leadership is coded in that way, lots of folk and lots of different expressions of it get kind of constructed outside of our definitions. Next slide, please. So third idea is the one that great leaders do specific things. So this is a very really reductive idea. This is this make it really simple, cut and paste leadership. Or you see this everywhere online and in social feeds. So it's the idea that if you do these 5 things, or this is what great leadership looks like. The top 10 qualities all great leaders have. And it's partly about that and the kind of clickbait and the people trying to sell you stuff, but it's also present in the sort of subtle expectations we have of leaders that they will do, be, and think a certain way. So they'll be strong, they'll have answers, they'll provide certainty when we feel unsure, they'll provide us with vision and clarity. This kind of expectation that leaders take up their role in a very specific way and do very specific things is something that's endured a very long time. So next slide, please.
So Simon's given you some examples of what some of these typical zombie ideas look like, but we thought we'd do a bit of an experiment and see how many of these are out there in the wild. So we went onto LinkedIn, and just half an hour of sort of scouring our pages did we find things like this. 10 signs that you're a natural leader, a true leader has a big heart. What else is there? 11 signs that you're a great leader. 10 leadership steps as part of our framework. So they're really everywhere, these ideas, and they do have an impact on our working cultures, because our working cultures are saturated with zombie ideas, and these are the ideas that we've all been conditioned on and brought up on. Next slide, please. So there's a video that we have that we're going to play in a second from the ShiftWorks platform. And it shows Vicky, who is a consultant in respiratory and transplant medicine. And in this video, she talks about some of the zombie ideas that she comes across as part of her work. So let's give that a watch and then we'll talk about it.
I have this feeling when I enter the room that the first thing they see is a foreign. I am a British citizen, but I grew up in Greece and I have an accent, and that's the first thing people hear. Female person with a lipstick on, and probably not a suit. I don't quite fit the image that people have of senior leadership, which is primarily male, with or without a beard, definitely with a suit, maybe with a tie, possibly white. I have been in position where I've been told to not be too assertive to my male colleagues in a professional environment when I was responding strongly but not with a loud voice to another very loud voice in the room. And I do have to wonder, if I wasn't female with a squeaky voice, whether I would have been told the same. People will not do what you tell them because there is a label on the door that you are the lead. And finding a way to bring people along with what is your vision or create a vision for the department is the most difficult thing.
So I really love this video because I look up to Vicky a lot and she's super senior and accomplished, and she is speaking with such vulnerability, which is really powerful. Which bit stood out to you, Simon?
Yeah, I think it's always quite shocking in some ways when you hear somebody who's really accomplished. Vicky's an incredibly intelligent woman in a very powerful role. I know actually she's a kind of world leader in what she does, and yet she is trapped and positioned by these ideas in a particular way that means it's harder for her to take up her leadership and use her voice without consequences. And so it's always interesting to hear someone who's you sort of think, wow, they've really made it, still feel kind of so trapped by these ideas. How these ideas shown up for you, Dara, across your career? Because obviously you're at the start of your career in many ways, and you've been in health and care for quite some time and worked in some cool spaces. But like, how have you encountered them in your journey so far?
Yeah, so I've encountered them quite a lot of the time, to be honest. I think, as you say, that's partly because I'm a young woman working in health and care, trying to get sort of seen and heard in this sort of space where lots of zombie ideas exist. But I think, I am ambitious and I do want to do well. And so what I've come up against to date is a lot of sort of, well, you can't be a leader because you're too young, sort of thing, which is really difficult because it sort of leads you thinking, okay, well, what do I do? Like, if I'm not ready for a leadership role, that's fine, but give me some feedback and give me something that I can work on. But I've been told that I can't be a leader at previous organizations, just because of my age, and those sorts of ideas that kick around are really damaging because, as we've said before, up top, we believe that leadership is a behavior. It's not kind of based on role, rank, or status. So it does sort of leave you feeling quite stuck, especially when lots of people tend to have these ideas around you. It's difficult to know what to do. And I know you've experienced it in different ways as well, haven't you, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, and I must admit, I mean, I basically fit the template for what zombie leadership says leadership looks like. Middle class, educated white male. I mean, I fit the mold perfectly. But even when I was younger, so I became a chief exec at 29 of a largish youth mental health charity, and I remember I'd never really given leadership much thought, but I remember when I got the job feeling very excited by the status that came with the job title and I liked the fact that people looked to me for answers. They looked to me and at me as though I was a leader. I did get very seduced by that and very energized by it. To be really frank about it. So for the first part of my career in that role, I took up my leadership in a way that was kind of the embodiment of some of these zombie ideas. And it's not to say some of these, like behaviors and characteristics don't have value, like vision and decisiveness. Those things, they matter. There's times when they're absolutely appropriate. But I think if you're taking up your leadership in a way that's a caricature, um, A, how authentic is it? But B, what are you excluding from your repertoire? What are you not doing that might be more effective in any given moment with your colleagues? And now, latterly, as a consultant here at the fund, when you work into the health and care system and you spend a lot of time in group sessions or in one-to-one coaching sessions with senior leaders, some of them are very senior, like Vicky, and you hear how imprisoned they feel by some of the ideas about leadership that they've internalized, but that also is projected onto them by others. You realize that these ideas are they're profoundly unhealthy. They might be seductive, but they don't serve us as leaders, and they don't necessarily serve the work that we're trying to do. So yeah, so that was my kind of take on it. Anyway, we've got a couple of comments in the Q&A just to draw. So is LinkedIn guilty of upholding these zombie ideas? And if so, it doesn't seem healthy. Well, I mean, what do you think, Dara?
Yeah,
You spent more
I mean,
time on
I
there than
guess
me.
look, it takes us on to kind of the next slide, really. Why won't these ideas die? And one of the points on there is that these ideas are lucrative. So, Sam, you're right. Like, LinkedIn is guilty of upholding these zombie ideas because there's a whole industry built around them. Just follow these 10 steps and you'll be the best leader. And there's, all the kind of executive education and books and coaching and all the rest of it that is sort of selling these ideas to you as though they're the magic bullet or the fix. And as Simon, as you really quite honestly said, these ideas are seductive. So they flatter those who are in senior roles, and they reinforce the elitist hierarchies. And they're also so pervasive because if you control the dominant ideas about leadership throughout society, it's one of the main ways of controlling power and privilege. And there's another reason that they're so pervasive. It's because they offer simple answers in what is an increasingly uncertain and complex world. So this desire of kind of heroic leaders with a cape who will just fix everything for us and manage our anxiety. And we've seen some of that heroic leader, that sort of trope in health quite a few times, haven't we, Simon?
Yeah, for sure, actually. And yeah, it's why we created ShiftWorks. So we created it because we believe that leadership is a behavior, not a job title, and that it can come from anyone, anywhere, at any time. So just catching Jackie's comment in the chat there, that zombie leadership can also discriminate against older members of staff with the assumption that you've had your day, basically, you're past your best. But actually, yeah, that in a more contemporary view of leadership, it can and should come from anywhere at any time and anyone, regardless of your age or status, whether you're at the start of your career or getting towards the end of it, and regardless of your rank kind of in the organizational hierarchy. Next slide, please, Caroline.
So we chose this quote because it says, most of the trouble in the world is caused by people wanting to be important. So I think this quote is a helpful reminder that these ideas aren't somewhere external to us. They do exist within us, and they very much live within us, and they shape our ideas about how we view the world. And it's important because what you believe about leadership will obviously then determine how you show up in the role. So it's important to pay attention to our own beliefs and motives and really think about why we might want to lead and why these roles are seductive. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, I want to be in a leadership role because I like having the authority and I like having the status that gives me. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's perfectly human and that's perfectly natural. But it's just about kind of drawing attention to kind of the school of thought that we've been raised on that's kind of led us to believe these things about leadership. Next slide, please.
So we're going to take a slight historical detour just to explore where some of these ideas about leaders and leadership have come from. And just to be clear, when I use the word ideas, I'm talking about ideology, I'm talking about beliefs. So it's really important to understand why beliefs are so important when it comes to leaders and leadership and how we see and take up both. So this is an illustration from one of our courses on the ShiftWorks platform, again, just to give you a sense of it. But I'm going to just walk you through a very, very quick high-level perspective on the last 100 or so years of leadership theory. So if you can just move the slide on one. So basically, I mean, there was, of course, a history before the 1900s, but we're going to start there just for the sake of brevity. So in essence, if you think about the turn of the 20th century and you think about the industrialization of our country and of Western societies, what you end up with is a story about leaders and leadership, which is the leader as controller, right? So the emphasis here is on efficiency and productivity, on output and throughput. It's a manufacturing idea. It's about it's that there are no people in this. The job of the leader is to extract as much value and productivity from the organizational machine as possible, and people are a cog in that. So the leader as controller sort of had its moment in the 1900s and sort of ebbed away, but it's never gone away. And all four of these ideas I'm going to walk us through have had their day in the sun, but they linger on. They don't ever fully die out like all ideas. They keep in some sort of circulation. So the 1900s sees the industrialization, this idea of leader as controller. If we get to the 1960s and the aftermath of the Second World War, you have the rise of humanism and this idea that, gosh, humanity and people are more than just widgets, and that work actually is a place where people might self-actualize, where they might find meaning and purpose. And so the leader becomes a kind of quasi-therapist, and they start to become much more interested in relationships and motivation as a way to guarantee performance and improve productivity. You leap forward into the 80s, and we get another story about leaders and leadership, and that is that the leader is a messiah. We've got this kind of liberalization of markets and this sort of hyper-capitalist kind of innovation, period of innovation. And we end up with leaders who are really visionary and charismatic, and who inspire this kind of devotional loyalty to their sort of personal leadership brand. And that doesn't require lots of layers of management and hierarchy. What it requires is a culture that is so kind of exclusive that it repels anything else. And it's the culture that becomes the kind of regulating way of organizing organizations. And then you jump forward to the early 2000s and into the sort of 21st century, and you get the story of the eco leader. And the eco leader is a concession that we start to see the world become this much more complex place. We understand that the planet is in trouble with the climate crisis, and that's because we start to see the connections between things, and we start to see the world and our organizations and human societies as living systems rather than machines. And the leader becomes much more of a gardener than an engineer, and so they become interested in connectivity and ethics. And actually, this is the first time that we start to see this idea of leadership being at the edges. So it should be close to where the problems are in our systems and organizational life. Next slide, please. The point with all of these stories, actually, though, is simply that what they are is a call and response to wider social, economic, and political changes in society. So this is really important. Leadership is not a science. It is made in response to these wider social changes. That makes it a social construct. And therefore, it's basically an idea. And so what you believe about leadership, it really, really matters, because it will determine how you take it up and what you look for in others. So it's not a neutral thing. It shifts over time. It's always changing and always evolving. And these zombie ideas have kind of lingered around, despite the fact that their usefulness or their sort of historical moment might have passed. And again, that's not to say some of those qualities that I've just rattled through very quickly don't have some value or some utility in the workplace. It's just that when these things become kind of crystallized as leadership models or templates for how it needs to look in any given situation, we run into some problems. Where are we today? Well, we have a more contemporary view of leadership that would suggest that it is situational, by which I mean it is shaped by the context of your organization, the very particular norms, power dynamics, culture and history of your setting and organization. That makes it a very kind of local phenomenon. It's relational. Leadership is powered by the everyday conversations, choices, conflict, and learning within teams, again, at a very local level. It's distributed. So this is that idea we've already kind of referenced, that leadership is visible in the way that groups and colleagues, teams coordinate their work, challenge one another, hold each other to account, support and show compassion for one another. And in that, it can potentially come from anyone, anywhere in the collective, regardless of their role, their experience, or their status. And then finally, leadership is emergent. So much of what leadership is actually just emerges in the moment in response to a problem or a crisis. For example, when someone in your team speaks up about a risk, calls someone out for poor behavior, shows compassion for someone going through a really tough time, or reframes a tricky issue in a way that allows you to all move on. Now, that kind of everyday setting or context for leadership is where the research literature has sort of settled, and it's where we definitely see leadership being a much more abundant resource in the health and care system than we ever give it credit for. And if you see it in this much more kind of everyday way, then it means there's a lot of it to be cultivated and developed. And again, that was part of our intention with ShiftWorks. Next slide, please.
So before we move on, Simon, I'm really keen for you to respond to some of the comments in the Q&A about, is this a distinction between management and leadership? And are zombie ideas kind of perpetuating ideas about those two things as kind of being specific, different things? What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a personal view is that we really over-egg the difference between leadership and management. It's a bit of an artificial split. And if you think about it, managers get a good kicking most of the time, don't they? They get a kicking in the press, even when who are actually being talked about. For if you think about the media coverage of the NHS at the moment, in particular, they talk about managers, and who they're actually referring to are leaders in terms of the organizational hierarchy. But managers generally get a kicking, and it's seen as less than leadership. Leadership is this much more rare and exotic elite thing, and that's why it's remunerated differently and it has different status in the system. My personal view is that some people and things need managing at different times, and some things and people need leading at different times. It really is context dependent, and that split, if you think about what makes a good manager and what makes a good leader, in the middle of that Venn diagram of those two roles, most things are the same. There might be one or two things that are different about resources or like where their attention or focus is, but broadly, it's a great question because it does highlight that we have elevated leadership as a phenomenon and as a skill set well above good quality management.
Yeah. And so the kind of split between management and leadership is one that is artificial. And if you view both as behaviors, then it's much easier to kind of view it as a more holistic thing that actually has, many of the same qualities if we're being real. So why are zombies such a problem? Well, I'm sure the answer to that will be probably quite intuitive to you, but essentially these zombie ideas undermine the kind of contemporary view of leadership that Simon has just outlined, one that's kind of distributed and emergent and situational. So what these ideas do is they position leadership as this rare, elite, extraordinary thing that's often really expensive, that could only possibly be done by those at the very top. So they reinforce elitist hierarchies and they concentrate power, resource, reward, status, and the very senior people at the top, and all of the hierarchical structures that mean that decision making kind of slowly flows up the organizational chart. And it makes things really difficult for everyone involved, actually, because it means that those who are in these really senior roles are then sort of laden with all the expectations and blame and successes. Like that becomes very personalized because everyone is really counting on them. So while the zombie ideas might flatter people, it might be quite seductive to be in a position of power, it actually makes things really hard. Next slide, please. So to continue that, if you're not in a leadership role, the zombie ideas that we've all been brought up on mean that we're kind of all given this like learned helplessness. I mean, I know I've done it in the past for sure. You're relying on leaders just to fix the problem. Like, oh, if only leadership could kind of get things together and say things in the right way or do the right thing. So what zombie ideas do is that they suppress leadership as a social practice. And, at the end of the day, leadership is, like we've said a few times now, it's a behavior, not a role. But it's also often quite an unglamorous behavior that might happen colleague to colleague, peer to peer, in the kind of quiet moments of compassion, quiet moments of challenge. Like that's when we're coming into contact with leadership, most of us on a day-to-day basis. Yes, leadership is sometimes about the big moves and kind of the big actions, but more often than not, it exists in very everyday ways between teams as we work together. So when we suppress this as a social practice, we're undermining performance at every level because we're only assuming that those in the top can fix our problems. Next slide, please.
Actually, before we jump into the antidote, because I've just spotted there's a few questions in the chat. So if we could go back a slide, just to sort of, not to kind of give away too much of the secret sauce too soon. But we've got some questions here that do speak to some of what you were just talking about, Dara, and sort of foreshadow what we're going to talk about in terms of some of the antidotes to this. But there's a couple of questions which are worth us maybe both having a go at. I don't know that we'll have great answers for you on these, but how do you tackle zombie ideas embedded into organizational structures, asks Charlotte Addy, especially for female leaders? This contributes to the glass ceiling, as even when you model leadership, you hit an immovable wall. Any thoughts on that, Dara?
Yeah, so I think it's about, if what I've said is true, which I believe it is, that leadership is about the kind of everyday peer-to-peer actions. I think it's about really owning the individual role that we all play. So particularly when we think about organizational cultures, we all form the cultures that we're a part of. And so at the minimum, what you have is the relationships that you have with others, and you have how you show up with others. But I think it's completely legitimate because we are trapped in a bit of a cycle. And there was another question that was speaking to some of this about how, like, on job applications, for example, you'll see a zombie idea on a job application, and then you have to respond to the job application about how you're going to uphold those zombie ideas. So none of this is easy at all. And being aware of these things, can sort of bring more light into what you're doing just by being able to give you the perspective. But it's really hard because they're so deeply embedded. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, I love that answer. That was so cool. And somebody, just as you were talking, John McLeod just put a comment in which I think speaks to that, and I just want to kind of really draw attention to. So he says, I think we all want to make leadership feel accessible to everyone. One thing I've noticed is that when we use the term leadership development, it can unintentionally reinforce the idea that leadership is a special club,
So
even
true.
if our messaging says otherwise. So maybe we all need to move away from the words leaders and leadership. Now, I partly agree with that, and definitely we want to make leadership much more accessible to everyone. But where I agree is I wonder whether we need to talk about leadership rather than leaders, because as soon as we start to talk about leaders, we start to turn people into projections of all kinds of these ideas and constructs, and we make them into objects rather than people. And that's one of the classic ways these zombie ideas trap senior leaders, is they dehumanize them. They make them appear as though they're these sort of invulnerable, extra human or extra superhuman kind of individuals who are capable of solving really complex challenges we face in health and care. So nobody wins from these ideas, other than those who are maybe particularly kind of satisfied by the sort of pay and rewards that come with being in very senior roles. So yeah, I would agree on that. Let's talk about leadership, and let's notice leadership when it shows up in our relationships, and let's cultivate it and encourage it in everyone, regardless of their job title or their status, and let's be less kind of inclined to sort of almost fetishize leaders themselves as individuals in those high status roles. Next slide, please. So what is the antidote?
So there's a few things, but it's essentially being more aware of the zombie ideas so that you're then better placed to catch them and mitigate their influence. But it's also about sort of thinking about what you can do as an individual, like I mentioned. So the antidote is sort of noticing and drawing attention to leadership that is distributed. So leadership that is about behavior and influence and not about role, leadership that can come from anyone and anywhere. Sometimes that is quite rare to spot, particularly in these hierarchical systems that we find ourselves in. So when you see it, notice it, draw attention to it, make a thing of it, and that will help sort of advocate for its presence as part of your workplace. Also focusing on leadership that is everyday and unexceptional. So amplify and normalize this. So I was talking about it a little while ago, but leadership is an unglamorous behavior that actually is very everyday. Yes, it sometimes is about the big moments, but often it's just about close colleagues coming together and their acts of support, challenge, compassion that often can be quite quiet. So leadership is something that is located in the relationships around us and our team context. And I think that also helps to bring some of it back into our control. If we view leadership as something that is all around us and leadership as something that we all can do, it helps us sort of take control of the leadership that we want, so that it's not like we're kind of always feeling like these zombie ideas are being done to us. Next slide, please. Leadership that is collective. So focus your energy on the health and vitality of your team. So the antidote to sort of these individualistic zombie ideas where only one person can do this and they're really specialized and they have to look and sound a very specific way, like the way to combat that is by really leaning into collectivism. So find ways to better leverage the inherent strength that we all do have together in our diversity, in our collectives, because there are things that you can see in collectives that you can't see as an individual. So really focus on your energy and trying to find ways that you can bring that more into your work. And then finally, leadership that is engaged and connected. So try and flatten hierarchies. You know, we've said it here, flatten hierarchies, devolve and delegate decisions as though it's so easy, because I know it's not. But wherever possible, even if it's in small ways, you know, really try and sort of trust people and be fair and just. And the best way to trust someone is to trust them, right? So if the wider society is in crisis and if our workplaces are kind of all shaped by unjust power relations, you know, really be principled in your behavior as a leader, and kind of demanding leadership that is engaged and fair, and sort of starting with yourself and with that as the best place. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so we've included this sort of summarizing quote, really, just to sort of conclude our argument about all these ideas. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang or a whimper, but with zombies breaking down the back door. And we've included it because it speaks quite nicely to the quiet, sort of insidious influence of our beliefs and our ideas about leaders and leadership, and how they will, over time, really get in the way of us making progress on some of the urgent kind of and complex problems that we face in health and care. I noticed, for example, you know, in the last year or so, you know, we've had a lot of some of it very good thought leadership about the challenges facing the system. It's been called a broken system, and the answer that we habitually reach for, and we have reached for it again as a society and as a government, is this idea that there are better leaders out there. Better leadership will solve these problems. A league table of, you know, strong, decisive executives competing with one another will drive up performance and drive up standards. Now, I don't know whether league tables will make that much difference, but it's interesting the framing and the levers, for want of a better word, that we tend to reach for when we bump up against significant challenges in our system. We either reorganize things or we develop more leaders. And when we say we develop more leaders, we're developing people in the most senior roles. We want to improve the quality of senior leadership. And our argument is that being, you know, staying wedded to that kind of old idea that leadership is about leaders, in the end will be what gets us. Because what we need is a much more everyday understanding of leadership that locates it in the relationships and the quality of team life and of our colleagues. Because to be quite honest, you know, if you go into a large, particularly some of the larger NHS organizations with several thousand, you know, 10,000 staff, the idea that a small group of people around the board table at the top can have that much influence over what happens in a system of that size is kind of a nonsense. The focus for our development and for improvement needs to be at a much more local level. And we need to validate the leadership that exists there, because there's an abundance of it. And ironically, if we develop more of it and we improve the quality of the relationships and the influencing behaviors that take place at a team level, teams will become much more fun places to work. They will become much more meaningful places to work. They will become much more capable and inventive when they, in terms of tackling the problems that we solve, and they'll unlock all these other resources, human resources in the system, which at the moment get suppressed by you know, hierarchies and you know, all these old tired ideas about leaders and leadership. And there's a lovely comment in the Q&A from Robert, who has said, do you think banding within the NHS inadvertently reinforces hierarchy and suppresses leadership? And it's got 18 upvotes, right? Which straight away tells me everybody agrees with that. And I agree with that. I have sat around so many meetings where people introduce themselves with their banding first. I'm Simon, I'm a band 6, and we go around the table and you hear everybody's kind of hierarchy. Yeah, anything jumping out at you, Dara, in the questions?
Yeah, I'm just having a look. So there's some questions about sort of the how. So how do we put some of these things in practice? So I kind of touched on it earlier, but what more could you say about that?
In the how of at an individual level.
Yeah, so you know, we know these things are
Mhm.
so pervasive. and it's really difficult. I'm just looking at a comment from Martin who says, I love the reference to relational working, but hierarchy in terms of position and decision making is rightly part of organization. So that's true. So sometimes, we do need hierarchy and we do need structure. Otherwise, where does the final say on decisions fall, particularly if there's lots of conflicting viewpoints? So I guess how do you reconcile the two? There is a need for structure and hierarchies, but there's also a need for another form of leadership too. So where do you sit on that?
Yeah, it's a really great point, well made. I sit in the place where we do need hierarchy. There is inevitably some hierarchy, and it's a very natural thing in organizing to have some hierarchy. I guess what it requires, though, is a degree of self-awareness from those in leadership roles with authority to hold that authority lightly and in a way that doesn't suppress or oppress other expressions of leadership or decision-making intelligence and whatnot. And that kind of self-awareness. So if you're doing leadership development, that's all you're kind of trying to get out of people, is to like improve their self-awareness so that they can be themselves more skillfully. But we all have blind spots, and we're all just human. We're all flawed. We can all find ourselves, taking up our role in a way that isn't particularly authentic to ourselves, or is trying to I don't know, take it up in a way that we think people want us to take it up because it's, that's the expectation we feel from others or we put on ourselves. So I think you've got to have a degree of self-awareness. You've got to be able to know that these zombie beliefs and ideas are out there, and therefore in your leadership actively work against them in the way you were describing when you were going through the slides there, Dara, about delegating decision making, inviting people to participate, being curious and trying to reach a shared understanding rather than an imposed one based on what you think. And in the end, if you need to make a call because someone's got to, then that's just what you have to do. But it shouldn't be the default that those with the most senior roles end up deciding everything. What's
Yeah.
your take on that? What would you reckon?
Yeah, same as you. I wouldn't add anything else. I think it's just about appreciating that the different options are available. So sometimes it will be necessary in crisis moments and moments where someone needs to take charge and be accountable to make a decision. But it's about knowing that that doesn't have to always be the kind of default route that we have to go through. Like we do have other options available to us, and it's important to kind of fully leverage all of those when we can. Gillian's put a really nice comment. She says, what are your views on people who don't see distributed leadership as being for them and are looking for others to make decisions and having less accountability themselves? Could this be zombie followship? Nicely said. And yeah, it's exactly that. I think that is another zombie idea, that I couldn't possibly make this decision because I don't have the badge and the name tag and all of the senior role. And so it acts to seduce and flatter those who are in the senior positions, but then I sometimes think it stops everyone else from trying, or anyone else from seeing that it's part of their responsibility too. So that kind of learned helplessness that we touched on a couple of slides ago, these zombie ideas go both ways, so no one wins.
Mm. And I feel like it's also totally legit just to see work as a paycheck.
Yeah.
I think we live in a culture where we're all told that work is where we find meaning and purpose. And I happen to, because work is important to me, but I also, plenty of people find their meaning outside of work. They don't, work is a means to an end, and I think that is also fine. I wouldn't want to see us create working cultures where there's a sort of tyranny of participation and leadership, and we sort of swing too far the other way. I think it's, especially in some roles, it's absolutely fine to see work as a means to an end, and if you show up and you're professional and you do your job well, then I think fine, don't lead. That's okay too.
Yeah.
There's a nice example in of this actually in the comments from Leeds. Elfriede Asprey, I hope I said your name right. You give shared decision-making councils. So these are an excellent example of collective leadership and working to flatten the hierarchy. So we've got some fantastic examples of positive change and influence in Leeds, including our globally trained nurses who have influenced large organizational policy change on anti-discrimination. So that's a really nice example of like a systemic or a structural solution to some of this. Shared decision-making councils, nice.
Yeah, I've also seen a really nice comment from Michelle who says, often find it helpful to think about my leadership as a shadow and think about how this is being cast every day. So absolutely, your leadership is something that is in your control, is, obviously related to your behaviors, but it also has a shadow and it also has implications. So again, I think we can find power in that as well, in terms of feeling as though we have control over our cultures and we have an active role to play in those.
Hmm. There's a comment from an anon. Do you know what's happening policy-wise or within organizations to make sure this shift in thinking about leadership really happens? If people at the top still hold these zombie ideas, what's being done to challenge that and make space for others to lead and influence change? I don't think we can rely on policy or any kind of national agenda being set around this way of thinking about leadership, sadly, because at the end of the day, health and care is a bit of a political football, and it's always kind of used and abused by politicians, often with good intent, but they end up trying to centralize things because they want to get a grip of the problem and they want to fix things, even though it's way too complex for that kind of approach. So they're always going to try. I think there's going to be an instinct to centralize stuff, including leadership, because that's the main lever through which they can kind of cascade policy. So I think the answer here is in individual leaders developing a self-awareness, Doris, you said in that comment about the shadow side of
Mm,
leadership, and actually taking up their role in a different, slightly more conscious way.
yeah. I've seen a couple of comments about sort of community leadership and how you sort of exhibit that. What would you say to that, Simon?
In community leadership,
Mm,
I I don't know. That's such a good question. I've I mean I started my career started in community development, so I have always recognized community leaders as leaders, and perhaps for me personally, actually, that's why I've quite a relaxed attitude about leadership. But I have also seen them try to take up a seat and have a voice around the table, and I've seen far too many shut down because they don't come with badges and privileges and long job titles and fancy educations, and therefore they're sort of delegitimized before they even try and speak. Or the flip side that sometimes happens. Individuals who are particularly charismatic. So this is the other way the zombie leadership ideas, I think, work.
mm,
Individuals within communities who are particularly charismatic and visionary and powerful and connected end up becoming the voice for an entire community, even though nobody kind of nominated them for that role. So there's something about just um, having our attention much more on collectives rather than individuals. And while, let's be real, hierarchy and individuals play an important role, we live in a society and a culture which is just obsessed with the individual. And so anything that we can do to push back, swim the other way, and encourage a multiplicity of perspectives and voices, and listen to some of the quieter voices and recognize those as potentially leadership voices, particularly when they're saying things we don't like, I think would be all good.
yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to flag a comment from Claire who says another one that won't die, so another zombie idea that won't die. Leaders have to be available 24/7, can't work part-time, flexibly, or in a job share. Still hearing this regularly. Yeah, absolutely. These ideas are everywhere. And the thing about zombie ideas is that once you spot them, they're very easy to spot again in the future. So hopefully now that you're aware of them, you'll be able to kind of spot them and critique them a bit more instead of kind of just taking them as gospel, as I think all of us have been conditioned to do. So I think it's also important not to give yourself too much of a hard time with this stuff because we have all been brought up on a society and a system that has perpetuated these ideas to us basically since birth. So a lot of them, when you sort of read some of these things about, leadership isn't about leaders, sometimes it takes you a while to sort of understand that properly and think, oh yeah,
Mm.
that is true. But because it's so second nature to us, because of how we've been taught to think about leadership, sometimes it just takes a bit of deprogramming, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? That's such a great example as well of the basic um, truth in all of this too, which is that these ideas don't serve senior leaders. if you're in a senior leadership role, that pressure to work all the hours available to you and to go at 1,000 miles an hour until you burn out and go off sick eventually, or you at the very best you get the diminishing returns of cognitive overload and poor decision making, and you're like you're not present at home for your family and stuff. Like, these ideas don't serve anyone anymore. Is the truth of it. And if we want to get to a place where the life in the health and care workforce is a more sustainable occupation, we're going to need to sort of reimagine some of our ideas about leadership.
Karis said a great question, so I'm going to kick it to you because it's a big one.
Oh.
What influence do you think the new NHS management and leadership framework will have on zombie leadership?
That's not fair. I don't think it will have any influence on those things. What do you think, though? I mean, I don't see it. I like it. In some ways, it will be a framework that upholds the beliefs we've been critiquing through the last hour. It will be an articulation of this is what it will be aimed at certain people, so therefore it will be aimed at leaders or people already in senior roles, and it will codify leadership in quite a specific way. And that's not the same thing as saying there aren't some skills or qualities that you should develop and cultivate, but the framework itself will be a framework that articulates a set of beliefs about leadership, which will probably be very consistent with what we've explored in this session. But what do you think, though?
I think the framework will, as you say, it will define some of these key skills and competencies that are believed to be helpful. And I think there's also something quite helpful in sort of distilling what it is that leadership is made up of, because I think sometimes we just view leadership as this like secret sauce that some people have and some people don't. So I do think trying to democratize some of what these behaviors, some of what the behaviors are and the ideas sort of behind them is helpful. But the trouble is that whenever you sort of codify something, you're making it quite limited, aren't you? So the space for the emergent, situational, distributed leadership that we've spoken about kind of gets lost if it's a kind of a contextless framework. So I think there's two sides to it. It's not unhelpful sometimes to kind of distill these ideas into something tangible so that we can all try and strive towards them. But it is also quite unhelpful if you kind of take that as the only view of leadership.
I can't resist asking you this next question. I'm sorry, it's just popped up and it's a bit naughty, but I'm going to ask it and I'll apologize to you later. But should everyone be on the same pay rate regardless of their position then?
It is an interesting idea, isn't it? And I know that some organizations do it. I think I was looking at an independent news outlet a couple of days ago, and I saw a job ad for them, and it says that everyone is on the same pay, and then regardless of role, and then pay increments happen organizationally when we all decide that we all need a pay rise or inflation or whatever it is. And it's a different model that I can see a lot of merit in, particularly if you're in a small organization. I think, we would be wrong to say that things like pay and money don't affect how all of us view our work, how all of us view our kind of roles and our status, like all of the sort of pay and money and the kind of materialism of it, like it does have a role in how we view things. And I think it's silly to kind of assume that it doesn't. So I can completely understand the merits of kind of a system where everyone has the same pay. How sort of realistic it is in the world that we're living in, I don't know. But I can see why someone might want that. What do you think?
Yeah, I love that answer, because I just think, it's a reminder. I didn't know about that news outlet, but there are other ways of organizing. Like,
Yeah.
in some ways, it's just healthy to, maybe in some situations, that shouldn't be the case. There should be a hierarchy and different pay and conditions attached to different responsibilities. Maybe in other situations, it makes sense to have a much flatter organizing model and do something different. What I like is, oh yeah, there are other ways of doing this rather than what we've sort of unthinkingly fallen into. So yeah, nice. Should we wrap this up, because I'm just conscious of time, and there's still some really cool comments coming in, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, especially those of you who asked a specific question. as I say, this will be posted back, and I think I can, just looking at a few of them, you will find answers in some of what we said earlier in the session. So do take a look at the recording when it goes up on the Kingspan website. But this is just a taster of the kind of stuff you'll find on ShiftWorks, although I must say we don't usually do it in this sort of webinar format. It's usually done as a much more interactive kind of hive mind type workshop. But you'll also, as Dara said at the top, for £35 a year if you're an individual, and it gets cheaper if you're an organisation, because I just clocked there was a question right at the start of the session about do discounts for organisations. Yeah, that price falls if you sign up as a department or an organisation over a longer period or in greater numbers. But you get access to the 9 CPD accredited courses that Lara talked about earlier on a range of leadership, management and health and care related topics. And remember, across all of those courses, we're trying to do the thing we've been talking about in this session, which is make leadership development accessible to anyone, regardless of their role or status in the system. And that means we've designed it in a way that it's not super like, concept heavy. There's lots of ideas and models in there for you to get your head around, but we've tried to make it light, a bit fun in places. It's very visual and graphic, as I hope you've seen from today's workshop. And it's not just about courses. There's also these monthly live workshops, as we've said, lots of bite-sized learning that we update every month to keep you topped up, and an absolute wealth of downloadable resources for you to take offline and experiment with your colleagues. In our own sort of modest way, ShiftWorks is our attempt to combat these zombie leadership ideas and do something different with leadership development, make it more accessible, and in doing that, make leadership a much more distributed quality and property across the health and care system. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for an hour of chat about zombies and ShiftWorks. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you are interested, you can scan the QR code on the slide you can see in front of you, and it will take you to our webpage where you can find out more and hopefully sign up. Dara, anything you'd say by way of a goodbye?
No, just thank you so much for joining and for your really thoughtful comments and questions. And that's the best bit about these sessions, kind of hear what people are thinking and hear what's resonating and what questions people are left with. So just thank you. Thank you for being so open and up for it.